In Hebrews 11, we read of the heroes of faith, and we've been studying some of these over the past few weeks. And there's one little passage, and it says how he quenched the power of fire, how they quenched the power of fire. Thinking today about the one who is with us in the fire. And the story seems to come from Daniel chapter 3. Famous story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and King Nebuchadnezzar, this man with a great ego, who sets up this golden image. All are to bow down to this image, and if they do not, then they'll be cast into the fiery furnace. Wonder today, in your own life, maybe in my life, we face those situations, not necessarily, of course, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are faced with this position of, will they be cast into the fire? But maybe there's a situation in your life or mine where we seem to be going through really difficulties, and we wonder, sometimes is God with us in the midst of what we're going through? Picking up the story today in Daniel chapter 3 and in verse 15. And it says, "But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God," this is Nebuchadnezzar saying, "and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" A reminder to us today of who is the God who does deliver us. Nebuchadnezzar was one who worshipped many different gods, polytheistic, and here he is saying, who can deliver you? And sometimes the world says that to us. Who's able to deliver you? Who is this God that you worship? Who is this one that you worship? Is he with you? Is your prayers ever answered? Does he really walk with you each day? And here's some of the proof, even from the scriptures themselves. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." No matter what way it went, these three men were determined to go with God. If God would rescue them, then he would rescue them. If not, then God had another purpose in that. And no matter what would happen, they would not bow down and serve another God or bow down and serve Nebuchadnezzar. The man is angry. You can imagine the king, what he's like. And of course, he heats up the furnace 7 times more than before, sends the soldiers, they arrest the men, and they're thrown into the furnace. In fact, the men who are putting them into the furnace die because of the extreme heat. And we pick up the story again in verse 24 of Daniel 3, and it says, "And then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste." This was after the 3 men were in the furnace. "He declared to his counselors, 'Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?' They answered and said to the king, 'True, O king.' And he answered and said, 'But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods.'" He had no real description for who this 4th person was. We are not sure who it is, of course. It's possible that is that Jesus himself, pre-incarnate Christ, here in the midst with these 3 men. And whoever it is that God has sent to rescue, he is with them in the midst of their trials. In verse 26 it says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning furnace and declared, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out.' And they came out. And they were unsinged, not even a hair of their head was touched. They were the same as they had been in, yet rescued through the midst of all this situation. And at the end, in verse 28, as the completion of this says, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, 'Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.'" Here we go now. He's completely changing his mind after he sees what has happened. who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Is there not a great encouragement to us today that we worship the true God and we remain faithful to that God who remains faithful to us and gives us that faith to believe and to trust in him? And there is no other God, for we are to have no other gods before him, for God is a jealous God. But here proving his love, his care, that wonder that he is with us no matter what. And he makes this decree, and then it says, therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. There is no other God. And if you're not a believer today and listening to this, who can rescue you? Who can save you? Who can change your life, transform your life, but also walk with you through this life and the difficulties, even here for some, the persecution that they face for believing in this God. And many today in other lands will be following Jesus despite the opposition, despite all that comes against them, even the kings or the presidents or the prime ministers of other nations that will force legislation against them. And yet they will stand today, many believers in Christ, standing for Christ, even going to prison for Christ. Today, what about you? Will you stand for Jesus? Will I stand for Jesus? And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. It maybe doesn't always work out like this. Remember their words at the beginning, if God rescues us, so let it be. If he doesn't, so let it be. But no matter what, we're not going to bow down to any other God. No matter what happens to us, to stay faithful, to stay true to the one true and living God, to Jesus who is with us, who never leaves us nor forsakes us, and here walks with his children in the midst of the fire. No matter what fire we're going through, he is there, only a prayer away. May you know that today. Thank you very much once again for listening.